Hello, welcome to BRAINWAVES podcast. I'm your host, Amo the Great. Today, we are diving into a fascinating concept that explains why organizations, companies, and even entire industry often resist innovation, even when it's clearly in their best interest. It's called the Shirky Principle. That's right. The Shirky Principle states, institutions will preserve the problem to which they are the solution. This phrase was coined by Shirky Clay, a renowned writer and thinker on the social and economic effect of the internet. While it sounds simple, this idea has profound implications for how we understand institutional behavior and the barriers to change. So, let's break this down. The Shirky Principle suggests that organizations are often designed around a specific problem or need. Over time, their survival depends on that problem continuing to exist, even if it means resisting solutions that will render them obsolete. Exactly. For example, think about the taxi industry before ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. Traditional taxi thrived on a model that depended on controlling medallion distribution and limiting competition. When ride-sharing disrupted this, the industry response wasn't to adopt, it was to fight back through regulations and lobbying, trying to preserve the old system. Another one is the healthcare industry. Some part of it thrive on inefficiency, administrative bloat, redundant procedures, and outdated technologies persist because they support the existing structures. If we introduce more efficient system, many of these roles or practices might no longer be necessary. Right, that's where the Shirky Principle really hits home. It's not about malicious intent, but about survival. Organizations don't actively want to harm innovation. They just act in ways that protect their relevance. Let's step back and look at history. Can you think of some historical examples where the Shirky Principle played out? Absolutely. A classic example is the publishing industry during the rise of the internet. Traditional publishers and newspapers resisted digital innovations because their revenue models, like classified ads, depended on the old system. Craigslist and other digital platforms obliterated that revenue stream, and many newspapers struggled to adopt. Another great example is the music industry. Remember the early 2000s when Napster and file sharing services disrupted how people accessed music? Instead of adopting and exploring digital distribution, the industry doubled down on lawsuits, suing individuals and companies to maintain their control over distribution. And yet, those disruptions ultimately paved the way for platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, which the industry eventually embraced after a lot of resistance, of course. So, why does the Shirky Principle happen? Why do institutions resist change even when it seems inevitable? One big factor is economic self-interest. If solving a problem threatens an organization's revenue or power structure, it's in their best interest to maintain the status quo. It's also psychological. Institutions are made up of people, and people fear change. There's comfort in familiar systems, they are inefficient or flawed. Plus, leaders often have a vested interest in preserving the system that brought them success. Let's not forget about sunk cost. Organizations invest heavily in infrastructure, training, and systems that align with the old way of doing things. Changing course means admitting those investments are no longer useful. A tough pill to swallow. Let's bring this into the present. Where do we see the Shirky Principle in action today? A big one is education. The traditional classroom model is over a century old and often struggles to adapt to modern technologies and teaching methods. Online learning platforms and hybrid models are trying to disrupt this, but the system is slow to change because so much infrastructure is tied on to the old ways of doing things. The same goes to energy. Fossil fuel companies resist renewable energies initiatives because their business models depend on oil and coal. Despite the clear environmental and economic benefits of renewables, these industries lobby hard to slow the transition. Even social media companies face the dilemma. They profit from algorithms that amplify engagement, even if it means spreading misinformation or harmful content. Addressing these problems head-on will mean rethinking their entire business model. So, how do we overcome the Shirky Principle? How can institutions embrace innovation instead of resisting it? One way is through leadership that prioritize long-term goals over the short-term profits. When leaders focus on the greater good or future sustainability, they are more likely to embrace necessary change. Policies and regulations can also play a role. Governments and watchdog organizations can incentivize innovation or penalize resistance to progress, forcing industries to adapt. And don't underestimate the power of external disruptors. Startups, new technologies, and grassroots movement often challenge the established system, creating pressure for change. Ultimately, it comes down to courage, both individual and collective. Institutions must be willing to face uncomfortable truths and let go of outdated systems to build something better. The Shirky Principle is a powerful lens for understanding why change is so hard, even when it's clearly necessary. It's not just about institutions being resistant. It's about how their very survival can depend on maintaining the problem they are supposed to solve. Absolutely. But as we have seen, history shows us that no system is permanent. Change may be slow, but it's inevitable. The question is whether institutions will adapt proactively or be forced to change by external pressures. And that is something for all of us to think about. Not just in organizations, but in our personal lives. Are we clinging to old systems or ideas that no longer serve us? How can we embrace innovation and let go of the past? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Shirky Principle. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves thought-provoking conversations. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning the status quo. Adios, muchachos.